are watching Simon Says on Mtgo Academy featuring Simon Götzen.
Hello and welcome everyone. Simon Götzen here recording Simon Says for mtgoacademy.com. I'm very happy to be back and it just in time for M15 draft. Magic 2015, the Pro Tour has just finished, and of course I'll be bringing you the combination of opening discussions and Magic Online draft videos. I hope that you're enjoying the show, and I'm trying to put as much strategic content into these, 5 to 10, sometimes 15 minutes of discussion. Of course, it also depends on how much time I do have on my hands. I don't have a slideshow this time, but I do have, I think, a pretty nice feature lined up. And the topic for today is going to be Convoke, and that's because Convoke is the returning mechanic for M15, returning in the sense that the people at Wizards are reusing one mechanic in each core set ever since the new core sets were invented, and then except for the first one, we always had a recurring mechanic. Now, the thing about Convoke is that there is just some questions I want to ask, and I grouped them into 4 categories. The first question is the impact of Convoke. How important is the mechanic for the overall limited format? The interactivity of Convoke, in which sense or how much are players affected by Convoke, not only by playing it themselves, but also if their opponent plays it. The complexity of Convoke, this is basically how do the decision trees look like, how difficult is it to decide for on a line, and this of course extends to playing, sideboarding, drafting, playing against Convoke, all these kind of things. And globality is the question of how far-reaching the implications of the mechanic are. So is it, for example, a mechanic that's primarily focusing combat? Is it a mechanic that's primarily focusing on, deck composition, mana curve? What does it affect? Does it affect drafting to a large extent, or is it just basically draft as many of these as possible and you'll be fine, as is the case with slivers, for example? Now, I do want to give a short overview of the returning mechanics or the recurring mechanics. Magic 2011 had Scry, Magic 2012 had Bloodthirst, then we had Exalted in Magic 2013, and I think most of you still remember the slivers that returned in Magic 2014. Now, the funny thing is, most of these got only a small exposure in recent times. You can see, for example, that 3 of them are mechanics that were only used in a certain portion of the color pie on Ravnicor or Alara, and also Scry was a minor thing in the smallest set of a block. So all of these got to shine in a sense. Now, what's interesting about this is that most players, or let's say lots of players, will have experience with the mechanic, and there will be a lot of stuff to read about it. People will have a predetermined opinion about it, all these kind of things. And ultimately, you have to reevaluate, not every single card, but you have to reevaluate a mechanic in the setting that it's presented in. You just can't compare Bloodthirst as a gruel mechanic in Ravnica with a set that has a very heavy Bloodthirst component as Magic 2012 had. Also, it makes a big difference if Exalted or Convoke is restricted to certain color combinations, or if it's available throughout the block. It just throughout the colors. It just means that no matter which deck you're facing, you have to be aware that Convoke or Exalted is a thing, as opposed to in the other blocks where you only need to be aware of your opponent potentially going for an Exalted strategy when they were playing Bant in Shards of Alara Limited. Now, where does that lead us? I think it means that the complexity of these mechanics is easy to underrate. Now, don't get me wrong, those aren't the most complicated mechanics. They are chosen to be in a core set for a reason. Although, to be fair, I think that slivers are a pretty complicated concept. And that means that we are looking at mechanics that look pretty simple on the surface and that are very easy to describe. Scrying is modifying the top of your deck to your liking. Bloodthirst is creatures get better if you've dealt damage before. Exalted means you get rewarded for attacking with only one creature. Slivers grow in multiples or affect each other and support each other. And then there's Convoke. And the very easy description is you can tap your creatures to cast your spells, to help cast your spells. But the implications of that are quite far-reaching. Now, I just made a list off the top of my head of some of the decisions that are relevant when it comes to Convoke. So clearly, you cast Convoke cards with the help of your creatures, and as experience has taught us, most often you will be tapping creatures, simply because shaving mana off a spell is huge, and that is one of the fundamental concepts in Magic. The more you pay for a card, the more powerful it is, and cheating the curve, for example, as Convoke allows you to, can be absolutely huge. You can, first of all, curving out can be a lot more brutal, but also just having that 1 or 2 creatures that make a 6-drop into a 4-drop or a 7-drop into a 4-drop, 5-drop, whatever, makes a huge difference and forces a response by the opponent. So Convoke cards are, in a sense, tempo cards, but not only in tempo decks, they just change the laws of tempo, which is a huge thing for any kind of game, basically. Now, there's a big difference when it comes to permanents or spells, because Convoke effectively costs you an untapped creature for the turn. You can compare it to attacking. Convoking basically means I give up the attack, or it's almost like there would be like the option to attack a player, the option to attack a planeswalker, or to attack an invisible mountain, an invisible pile of mana. So that's basically what Convoking is. You attack a pile of mana to get that mana token for the turn. And for permanents, that means, in general, you cast them sorcery speed, of course, for sorceries and permanents. It means that you lose your blocking ability. That's the cost of Convoke. With spells, it's different, and by spells, I probably should have put instants there. With instants, you will always have the option to just hold creatures back, which is a cost still, but you will have the option to cast spells even if you are tapped out or if you don't have the required mana. So especially good combat tricks with Convoke or a card like Devouring Light are hugely different once you put Convoke onto them. Now, this kind of affects how you play against Convoke as well. If you know that your opponent is likely to have a Convoke card, then you need to be aware of the fact earlier than that. Now, you'll see when somebody casts a Convoke card, because Magic Online highlights their creatures in a red border. But oftentimes, when deciding if or when to remove a creature, you should err on the side of caution and remove the creature, just so that the positive effect of Convoking kicks in later. And that's especially true if there is with the Convoke Angel that becomes XX, of where X is the number of creatures, Seraph of, I'm not exactly sure what it's called, Seraph of New Dawn. And playing against Convoke spells is really, really tricky. Now, sometimes you have all the information you need. If your opponent starts off with a red creature and then next turn, before attacking, taps out for another red creature and then attacks into your creature, you can be quite certain that it's the red Convoke spell for one that gives +1/+0 on first strike. However, if your opponent just passes with a couple of blockers, then you don't know if there might be a spell giving a creature indestructibility or a Gather Courage waiting for you. So it's really tricky to play against Convoke spells, which in turn means that Convoke spells are pretty good if you can make them cost 0. Now, I already talked about the pre-Convoke turns, where you have to decide if killing a creature is maybe more valuable than you would usually think. And then this is just some of the things that are happening on the battlefield. But what happens if you draft Convoke cards? Well, a Convoke card will not have the converted mana cost that's printed on there, usually, but it will also not have the color requirements. So if a card is double casting cost and has Convoke, you can just compensate for that by having a lot of creatures of the corresponding color. Now, in general, that means that you will have the right mana, but still, it means that a card like Siege Worm or the Seraph will be very unlikely stuck in your hand because of color requirements. It's almost like a colorless spell in the right deck. Now, both of these things and others affect how cards in general have to be evaluated. And I think that's most obvious in draft. If Convoke is a big thing, and I think we can say that it's an impactful ability in this format, even if it's not dominant, it's not like everybody is drafting Convoke decks only, but it's definitely a serious mechanic to consider whenever playing or drafting this set. And that means that cheap creatures, for example, are a lot better than in other formats. I remember when people were playing Springleaf Drum, of course, for different reasons, but effectively, Convoke cards give you free Springleaf Drums to cast your spells with. And as a result, 1 and 2 drops become a lot more powerful, and ways to utilize these 1 and 2 drops, of course, to make them better in the late game, rise in value as well, which is why I think that Sanctified Charge is an absolutely phenomenal card. Also, Raise the Alarm, you're always happy to have. And then that also has its effect. If 1/1s become better somehow, then 2/1s become weaker, and then you kind of want to go into the 2/3 or 3/3 mode. But if you go up higher in the curve, you have the downside that creatures are very easily chump blocked or held off by tokens while you lose in the air. So there's definitely a sweet spot along the curve. And I put Modified Card Evaluation Battlefield as the last point, which goes back to the fact that sometimes you have to remove a creature early on, but it also means that simply because Convoke exists, you need to evaluate your creatures in a different light. If you are playing the Convoke deck, you don't want to trade your creatures unnecessarily. If you aren't playing the Convoke deck, you want to aggressively force your opponent to trade his creatures. If your opponent denies the trade when you're attacking, and then uses the creature to convoke something, then you've dealt damage and they haven't. If they block, they have weakened their whole deck because they are missing the tools to convoke, which is kind of the best thing you can do to beat Convoke, is to make the actual Convoke cards bad, if you can manage to. So every game has this sub-game of the Convoke player trying to maximize its Convoke cards, and the other player has a strong desire to remove the amount of creatures on the battlefield, or to at least deal damage if trading is not something that you can accomplish. In a sense, this is very similar to draft games where one player has overrun. So let's say you have an overrun in your deck and your opponent knows it. What you should always be trying to do is not to accept any unnecessary trades, which usually means holding back and only blocking at the very last moment, or in situations where you don't have any other choice. Of course, you would trade a 1/1 for a 4/1, but if there is a 2/3 attacking, it's just much more likely that you will take the damage rather than risking a blowout if you double block, something like that. And then you're just drawing towards this one overrun. But in a Convoke deck, you're much more likely to draw a Convoke card and be rewarded for this kind of play. Of course, after a while, once you have enough mana, sufficient mana, this all changes. You don't need to basically keep this going until you draw overrun, but you have to decide how the value of your creatures changes over time. All right, let me just make these small again so that we can have a sweet look at this Sliver Overlord. And yeah, a Sliver Hive Lord, I'm sorry. I still have to learn all the names for the next GPM casting, but that's going to be standard, so I don't see any issues there. That was my look at Convoke as the recurring mechanic of M15, and I also prepared a draft for you. I'm happy to be back. Hope you're enjoying the show.
Love playing Standard on Magic Online? Check out Academy's Standard Bot in the Magic Online Classifieds for standard singles.
Hello everyone, time to draft M15. Chasm Skulker is a pretty nice rare. I had it in my pre-release and I was always happy to have it. Of course it's best early, but just a powerful blue card to pick up. Kurt Chieftain is pretty absurd if you have the green mana to support it. It's already solid as a 4 mana 3/3, but if it turns into a 4/4 in conjunction with the activated ability, it's actually pretty crazy. So I think Chasm Skulker and Kurt Chieftain probably the strongest here. There's also Spirit Bonds. Yeah, I don't know. If you want to draft white tokens, then that's definitely an option as well. I'm gonna go with the Chasm Skulker here, and the reason for that is that I don't want to take the double colored card that early. I didn't have enough time to talk about all the commons, but I think it was quite obvious that the rarer cards were more powerful, which is a general trend in core set limited, I think. And it looks like we're getting punished here. I could have had 2 Kurt Chieftains had I first picked that one. So yeah, would have been a lot better, obviously. There's Ancient Silverback, Kurt Chieftain, and Nimbus of the Isles, I guess, if we want to stick to the blue cards. I generally think that it's a bad idea to just stick to one color too early, because it's still better to just pick the strongest card in the pack, and that is definitely Kurt Chieftain. Now, from a signaling perspective, that's pretty awkward, and if there was something that was on the same power level or remotely close to it, I would consider it. I just don't think that Ancient Silverback is sufficiently good to pick over Kurt Chieftain, especially considering that Kurt Chieftain is also a green card in a sense. Okay, the rare is gone. Somebody took a common out of the pack, and there is Constricting Sliver, Roaring Primadox, and Wall of Limbs, which are all reasonable, but don't excite me as much as the previous 2 packs. There's a Cursed Spirit, which is great because evasion is just something that black doesn't have a lot of access to. Blast Firebolt is a bit expensive for my taste. It's definitely a playable card, but it's nothing that I'm excited about to put in my deck. Also, the rest of the commons aren't amazing either. Kinspace Skirmisher, Razorfoot Griffin, Netcaster Spider don't really compete with the uncommons. I think that a Cursed Spirit is the better card compared to Wall of Limbs, and then Constricting Sliver and Roaring Primadox are the other options, with the issue being that none of them are in my colors. I'm going to take Roaring Primadox here. It does have a bit of synergy, and I have a tendency to go green after this Chieftain second pick. Okay, let's look at this. Necromancer Stockpile. So you get to exchange creature cards for new ones, which isn't what you really want to be doing with such an effect. You would much rather discard lands to draw into more spells. And then if you discard zombies, you get a nice bonus zombie out of the deal. The problem is that it's really unclear how many of these zombies you can ultimately draft, and also how many of them you want in your deck. I like this Necromancer Stockpile with Chasm Skulker. The question is if there is something that comes close to in power level. Yeah, I don't think Titanic Growth does it for me. So I'm gonna pick this rare just to maybe try something out here. I basically have 2 decks right now. The red-green deck that wants to abuse Kurt Chieftain, and then maybe a blue-black control or value deck with the 2 rares that I've managed to pick up. Regarding blue-black, there's a zombie here, which it has gotten a bit better now that I have the Necromancer Stockpile. The red cards aren't amazing. Might Makes Right, I haven't tried it yet. It doesn't seem amazing for such a high investment. Encrust is a solid card. Definitely a nice blue card to have. I would say it's better than Necromancer's Assistant, even with a Necromancer Stockpile drafted already. I'm gonna take the Encrust here. It's I think that generally speaking, you are much more likely to have too many creatures rather than too many spells. So picking up solid removal spells in overall colors is something I really like to do. There's a Frostlings here. If you want to play tempo, which is not really my style, then you can definitely pick the Frostlings quite highly. It's also has some nice synergy with Roaring Primadox. I can definitely see picking it here. I don't like the white cards. I don't think that Shrapnel Blast is a particularly good pick. And then the real alternatives are the green cards, Titanic Growth and Charging Rhino, which I think aren't on the same power level as the Lynx. Alright, Void Snare is the card with which to continue drafting blue. Another tempo card, so my control plan probably would have to be exchanged for something else. Although Chasm Skulker is not a control card, it's actually quite aggressive and makes Divination a lot better as well. Stain the Mind is not a not a limited card. There's a Satyr Wayfinder which I'm looking at, which might actually be better than Void Snare. It looks unassuming, but I already have a Primadox and kind of like the idea of maybe convoking some cards as well. So let's try that. Not a fan of any of these cards here. Unmake the Graves, maybe, but it's not even a card that I want to pick up early because I usually don't want to have more than one of them. I like Plummet as a sideboard card and sometimes even a main deck option. It just deals with so many troublesome permanents. Restock would be an alternative, but it's just rather clunky. I'm gonna take Plummet here. Alright, Undergrowth Scavenger is not a card that I want to have in my limited decks generally. It's obviously great if the game goes really long, but I don't want to have this card in my hand, in my opening hand, or want to draw it early, which is generally a bad sign. I'm going to take Void Snare here. I think it's unlikely that we're going to end up in black, so I'm just going to start passing these cards. Here, I want to pick Aggressive Mining. It's rather unlikely that I'm going to end up playing it, but I might want to try it out. And I generally don't tend to draft Lava Axe decks, so happy about that. Neutralize against Bronze Sable is interesting. Like I said, you usually are lacking spells, but Bronze Sable also blocks Intimidate creatures. I'm also a bit all over the place regarding colors, so I think picking the Bronze Sable here is a nice backup to make sure that I'm not going to lack playables in the end. At this point, I'm pretty much passing the white and the black because I haven't gotten any signals, and even the red is just an outside shot really, with the Kurt Chieftain just being that good that I might actually consider splashing for it. No, Fugitive Wizard is definitely not making my main deck. Research Assistant I like quite a bit. It's expensive for 4 mana, but it is a 1/3 for 2, so that's nice. Oh, there's a Sanctified Charge. Too late for that, sadly, but this card is really, really good. So I do have to read the rares here. Each power and toughness equal to the round number of forests, and it actually, well, it just copies itself when it comes into play. That sounds really good if you have a sufficient number of forests. Currently I have quite a lot of blue cards as well, but I can shape my deck around that. Illusory, I don't know how to pronounce that correctly, is also a fun card, but you really need to have a very good curve to support it, or maybe even some Ornithopters or such. Divination is a card I really like to have in core set pretty much whenever I have the chance, but here I'm going to take the Twin Grove and see if we can make that work. Invasive Species would be a nice combo piece if I really wanted to abuse some come into play abilities. I have the Satyr Wayfinder, even the Twin Grove has a comes into play ability, so I can keep that in mind. It actually has a drawback of sorts, but it's also a 3/3 for 3, so I think you can usually find ways to get around that. I'm not a fan of the Path Mage. I don't think that I need Dissipate. I love Broodkeeper, but I'm not picking it here. So it's really between Netcaster Spider and Invasive Species, and I want to try out the species. It does have a drawback, but I think I can maybe turn it into an advantage. Alright, I see an Elvish Mystic, which is generally a good sign if you are in any kind of green deck. Let's just do a quick check. There's a Peel from Reality, which I think is worse, and there's a Venom Sliver, which I also think is worse. So I'm happy to just pick the one drop that's going to accelerate me, make the Primadox better, and so on. Turn to Frog was always a nice way to deal with arbitrary opposing creatures, and it might also be the best card in this pack. There's a Shaman of Spring, but I don't need to overdo the whole combo aspect that I talked about. So yeah, happy to have the Turn to Frog. This is unfortunate. The Jurobai Murkloker requires swamps to do anything substantial. There's a Wolfforged Golem, which I could take here. There's also Hunt the Weak. Hunt the Weak, not an amazing card, but another removal spell in 2 colors which don't have many. So there's also Living Totem, which is never bad, but also never super amazing. I'm gonna take Hunt the Weak. I think it's better than Wolfforged Golem. And I've seen Wolfforged Golem go quite late as well. Divination or a second Turn to Frog are the options that I see here. You definitely don't want to overload on Turn to Frogs, because at some point you're just sitting with them in your hand and you kind of have to cast them, but you never know if your opponent might not have something to help him or to blow you out, basically. I always like to have at least one Divination in my deck, even if it's not amazing in this kind of strategy. I think I'm gonna take Divination to diversify a bit. I don't think I want a second Void Snare. And there's this Shaman of Spring that I talked about earlier, which looks like it has a place in this deck, even if it's not going to be superb or anything. I like Runeclaw Bear. There's also Phyrexian Revoker, which I guess has an ability that might do something. And it's also an artifact which might be an advantage sometimes. Yeah, I guess I'm taking the rare here. Something tells me it has to be better than a Runeclaw Bear. There's another Broodkeeper, which is pretty scary. I hope that I don't have to face the Broodkeeper deck, because with only a Hunt the Weak, I'm gonna have issues with that. Could pick Back to Nature. Don't think I need Glacial Crasher. I'm in green, so I will most likely have ways to pick up fatties over the long run. So I'm gonna take this as a sideboard card. Forge Devil is a card I don't want to play against, and Chrono Starter is nothing that I really want to play with 6 mana just being a bit too much. Alright, I don't think that I care for any of these, but I'm gonna take out Ornithopter just so that nobody turns it into a 5/5 and beats me down with it. I'm quite surprised to see these late Void Snares. I wouldn't have thought that this is a card that goes so late. I'm gonna take Evolving Wilds though, because I have this dream of playing Kurt Chieftain anyway. So let's see if that works out. Alright, time for pack 3. Interesting choices here. Step Wound looks like the best card, but I can't take it, or I can't support it. I don't want to splash black with the picks that I already have. So it's most likely going to be a blue card, but I'm not amazed by any of them. Chief Engineer has 2 artifacts to make cheaper, but none of them are super amazing. And Ensoul Artifact doesn't really have the targets it needs right now. Titanic Growth is solid, but I don't think it's worthy of a first pick. So yeah, I think I'm just taking the Chief Engineer. Or maybe even Aeronaut Tinkerer. I kind of like Evasion, even if it's not guaranteed. But Chief Engineer seems a bit better. I hope that I can maybe pick up some artifacts in this pack. And there's an interesting one. Grind Clock is a very, very nice win condition that's super tough to deal with for the opponent. You do have to do some math and figure out how to play it. But I know that in I think it was in Scars of Mirrodin, if I remember correctly, it was actually a super underrated card to have. I'm taking it here. I think this works quite well in the deck that I'm drafting here. Alright, Obelisk of Earth is creature type dependent, so I don't think that really works in my deck. Maybe in a white token deck, you can make it work. I also think that somebody played it and constructed at the Pro Tour, so that's quite fun. I like the idea of just picking Coral Barrier here as a solid value defender. Now that I have the Grind Clock, I'm looking for defensive options a lot more closely. Coral Barrier is competing with Netcaster Spider, which might be a better way to stop air attacks, which could actually be more relevant given that I'm blue-green. Yeah, I've convinced myself to pick the Spider here. Seraph of the Masses, I've nightmares from this card. I like Encrust. Another Encrust doesn't seem bad. I also don't see anything that I want in my deck otherwise. I'm not a fan of Tyrant's Machine. It's just a bit clunky. In this deck, it could actually work out, but Encrust is just super solid. And I would have the option to pick up the Coral Barrier, which I previously passed. There's also Nissa's Expedition to get some ramp going. It would also allow me to splash for Kurt Chieftain. I'm not sure how good this is. It does look a bit expensive, a bit clunky. And then there's Capsho Kite Fins, which might actually be the best pick available. It does cost 6, but it gives me a nice flyer. It's best in aggressive decks, which my deck definitely isn't. So I'm not 100% sold on this one. If I had a few more token makers, I think the Expedition would actually be great. I think I'm just taking it anyway. My deck seems like a deck that can really make use of mana quite well with the Tringrove and the Chieftain and maybe some Roaring Primadex shenanigans and so on. There's a Seder Wayfinder. There's also a Willforged Golem, which works nicely with the Chief. Not really with the Chief Engineer. It already has Convoke, but it works nicely in these kind of 2 and 3 mana heavy decks. So I still think that the pick is Divination, simply because I have the Chasm Skulk and I have this really grindy setup here. I'm seeing another Sanctified charge, which is kind of scary. Also, Core Crash is definitely not a bad card at all, but hopefully that doesn't come back to bite me. Do have the option to hate draft here. If I don't want to play against this Sanctified charge, I can definitely just take it out. Alternatively, in my colors, Aeronaut Tinkerer, Bronze Sable, and Negate. Yeah, none of these are particularly exciting. I'm a fan of Negate in Core Set Limited because the scariest cards are often non-creatures, and that I would have at least played in the sideboard. Yeah, I don't think I need another Bronze Sable, and Aeronaut Tinkerer doesn't seem super important. Oh, interesting, a Meteorite. That's actually really nice to splash the Kurt Chieftain. It doesn't require Mountain in play, and it actually is a card that gets better with Chief Engineer. So I can take an Ensoul artifact here, but I'm still only playing 4 artifacts. And turning Grind Clock into a 5/5 is kind of weird. I guess if you know that it's not going to do its job otherwise, you just go on the beatdown plan. It just doesn't seem like something that this deck is really trying to do. I'm going to take it here, but I don't think it's likely that I'm going to end up running it. Gather Courage looks like a really nice combat trick to have, because you can tap out and still potentially engineer and a blowout. I don't care for any of these. There's another Scavenger. Yeah, I'm going to take it here. As I've said, I don't think I'm running it. If I had more Wayfinders, then it would definitely be an option. Hey, I could actually play aggressive mining in this deck with the 2 divinations and the Nissa's expedition. Just maybe go off with aggressive mining. I've never played it. It does seem pretty sweet with Chasm Skulker as well. But the problem is you can't really cast it on turn 4 because then you'll never play lands again. So that said, I think my most likely splash is just a mountain for the single chieftain, and I'm not gonna try any Ornithopter install artifact shenanigans because I don't have a lot of Convoke, and Ornithopter doesn't do anything else in my deck. It doesn't really help with anything. Let's see if I group these separately. Then I get a bit of a better idea what I'm working with. I like the invasive species. I like the Netcaster Spider, and Frostlings is not going to be horrible. It is not a tempo deck, what I ended up with, but it's still going to be solid. I don't necessarily have to play Chief Engineer, but if I do, the Meteorite gets a lot better. So I think I want that. It isn't going to be much weaker than Research Assistant anyway. What I could do is take out some of the other artifacts because I don't need multiple 2/1s for 2. Looking at the spells, which I did prioritize, I'm gonna have to cut a few of them. I'm not gonna be able to support all of these cards. So Plummet looks like a natural cut, and Back to Nature as well. I don't think that I want Void Snare simply because I already have the Frostlings, and if I overload on tempo cards, then my opponents can actually maybe grind me out. It's not going to be easy to grind me out, so I definitely could run the Void Snare. I could also cut the Frostlings. I think that's very similar cards in a sense. I'm afraid I won't be able to play all of these clunky spells, but I definitely want the divinations. Now, let's cut the Bronze Sable, leaving me with 1 card to block Intimidate guys with, and I want to keep in the Research Assistance for its looting ability in the later stages of the game. I also can't cut down too much on cheap creatures, otherwise the Roaring Primadox becomes too much of an issue. So with these cuts, I only have to cut one more. Non-creature, and I like the Meteorite, especially with the Chief Engineer. I think the weakest cards are Statute of Denial and Nissa's Expedition. I wanted to try out the Expedition, but with the cards I have, it's probably just too weak to consider. I like the fact that it makes the Twin Growth better, but it's just the card with the least impact. And I like to have at least one piece of counter magic in these kind of decks. So let's see how this looks. Yeah, this looks really solid. Just a pretty even split. I have a couple of double blue cards, but I would want the same amount of forests because of the Twin Growth, and the number of green cards is also comparable. So putting in a mountain and the Evolving Wilds leaves me with 15 slots. Looking at the Encrusts and the Statute, it's probably just safer to have 1 extra island, given that the Mystic provides a green, an additional green. I'll rarely be stuck on not having too many green sources. And I'm not playing the Carnivorous Moss Beast, for example, which if I would definitely change the math a little bit. So the one thing I don't like about this is that the Twin Growth potentially suffers a bit from that decision. It's still probably better to have the blue mana so that I can run out a blocker and then cast Divination to draw me into my lands. So gonna base it on that. So I already added the mountain, and that leaves me with 8/7. which I can add to this deck, and then I'm pretty much done. Depending on the matchup, I have quite a lot of nice cards to bring in, and this deck can definitely play a long game and isn't completely dead to anything that the opponent might play. I also have the Encrusts to punish auras, otherwise I would definitely want to main deck the Void Snare. Alright, this is interesting. Still trying to explore this format, as you can see, but we have a grind clock, and that's going to be fun.
Do you love to play Magic Online but have a tight budget? Check out Mtgo Academy's Academy Budget Bot in the Magic Online Classifieds. All cards in stock are cheaper than one event ticket.
It is time for round 1, and I will play first. Great, no lands. Wayfinder Divination, but of course, without a land I can't keep this. And this looks better, but a bit slow. I still think that I keep it. I have a green and blue source, so I can definitely draw myself out of this. Netcaster Spider and Gather Courage also work quite nicely together. My concern is that fetching a forest denies me the potential turn 4 Kurt Chieftain, so I'm gonna wait on the Evolving Wilds as long as I can, which probably just means 1 turn. But still, it does make a huge difference if I just draw a forest here. And there it is. So that actually paid off beautifully. With the forest on top of my deck, I can now decide to fetch the mountain with Evolving Wilds so that the Kurt Chieftain can come down and hopefully win me the game. Yep, I'm taking 1. Getting the mountain. And a Roaring Primadox, not necessarily great. If I draw a land next turn or any time after that, my first priority is going to get Kurt Chieftain down anyway. And I'm not unhappy to have the Primadox, even if it's kind of bad now that I'm stuck on mana. I don't want to draw anything that costs more than 3. But to be honest, there isn't too much in my deck. Okay. Well, that's actually a pretty good card. So that way my opponent can keep attacking. But if I don't draw a land, I will just keep this up anyway. And then it's kind of a weird standoff. And if I draw the land, it's actually kind of nice with the Primadox. Because returning this creature to my hand is pretty much a net advantage. So, because of that, I could consider playing the Primadox. But the loss in tempo is still a problem. Now, there's something interesting here with Johnny's Pridemate growing from Sungrace Pegasus, which means that I kind of want to get down Netcaster Spider again as soon as possible. I'm just afraid that I'll lose to my own Primadox because the tempo disadvantage is too much. So I'm running out the Chieftain here. That will hopefully allow me to attack or block the Pridemate. I have the Gather Courage available. So let's see what happens. Marked by Honor. Alright. That's actually a pretty good play by my opponent. But I'm gonna get him with my Convoke spell. And that's an absolute blowout here. I think that Marked by Honor should have probably gone onto the Pegasus. To diversify, because if the Pegasus keeps coming through, then the Pridemate would have grown anyway. So yeah, nice try by my opponent. I mean, I'm tapped out, so okay. There was a huge turn for me My opponent would have even ran into the red Convoke spell there. So exposing yourself to both Convoke spells is just not something that you can do in M15 Limited, I think. And now if I don't draw anything, I can just run out the Primadox, which means that I get to reuse the Spider. If I draw a land, my Chieftain is active. So this looks really nice. Divination. I think that's actually better than casting the Primadox. Yeah, I mean, drawing lands is pretty much the best thing that can happen to me. I'm willing to attack here. I'm on 16, and the Chieftain is only preventing one point of damage. Does look like I'm just facing mono white. Yeah, no other spells and now 0 cards in hand. So this does update, which means that my draw is actually phenomenal. I'm just willing to raise this. There's no reason to run out the Primadox when I can just get down the Tringrove, which is a super sweet card, by the way. Getting like 2, I don't know, Treefolk brothers, twins, I guess. On the warpath with the Chieftain still, and I even have the activation yet now, so my draw developed really nicely, considering that I had to mulligan to 6 on the play, and then I had an island and an evolving wilds with only green spells, but I was still able to curve out like this. And Gather Courage won me the game. If I win the game, it was only because of Gather Courage. Now I only have to be careful not to die to my opponent's flyers. I'm taking 3 in the air, and the Selfless Cathar is representing more damage as well, which could become a problem if my opponent top decks Triplicate Spirits or something along those lines. My opponent is basically forced to chump block, and double chump block is very nice here. Also, we are far away from mass calcify or anything like that. And I even get to keep up the mana for oppressive raise. That was quite the beating. So, looking at the sideboard cards, I think I'm bringing in the Plummet. It's really not no reason not to. I think, even if I just get a Pegasus that's growing in a Ajani's Pridemate, for example, and if my opponent plays these auras and wants to put them on his flyers, it's also great to have it. So I'm wondering whether Grind Clock is the wrong card for this matchup. Playing against a mono white aggro deck, I probably won't have the time to grind people out that way. I'm just gonna bring in Void Snare, I think. It's another very nice way to deal with Ajani's Pridemate and the life gain, lifelink. Or it doesn't even give lifelink, right? It's just +2/+2 on vigilance. Yeah, I forgot the name. Whatever my opponent played into my Gather Courage. So Statute of Denial might not be good enough here. Again, with the argument being that my opponent is trying to be very aggressive. Roaring Primadox also not amazing, but I still think it's better to just have a 4/4 with a potential upside than a clunky 4-mana counterspell. I really like Negate. I can't see the card to cut for it, because, well, it does protect me very well, especially from Sanctified Charge. Once I have the game pseudo locked up, it's going to be quite valuable. It could actually be that it's better than the Roaring Primodox. Just kind of sad. But yeah, I think I might try that. Let's see if Negate works out. Otherwise, I'm gonna change plans again. The opponent is keeping, and I'm keeping as well. I don't have a forest yet, but if I do, I have the Wayfinder, and if I don't, I still have Divination, and the rest of my hand looks really good in this matchup, so I don't see a reason to go down to 6. I don't assume that I'm never going to draw a land again, so I should actually have quite a lot of lands. It's going to also be important to draw some of my spells, some of my creatures. Alright, there's my mana fixing. Oracle Swiftclaw, so this is where I need the forest. Alright. Yep, I might take some damage here from the Swiftclaw, and in the worst case scenario, I need to draw into forest with Divination, discard the card, but then at least the Wayfinder should help me out. It would of course be better to just have the forest next turn. Three-1 flyer. Okay, so Plummet is live. There we go. So lucky. And a mountain, but the crit chieftain is going to the graveyard. Interesting. I don't have to take the mountain if Kurt Chieftain is in the graveyard. I don't think I have a way to get it back. That means I'm just taking the forest. Oh well, I can live with that. It was a top deck to find the forest, and whatever is put into the graveyard is random anyway. So currently I don't have a way to turn to frog something very effectively, but I do have the plummet and might just hold that up to kill the guys next turn. Seems better than casting Divination. I don't want to take extra damage if I don't have to. Negate is actually a great draw. So now it's very easy to just pass the turn here. There's no reason to cast my spell when my opponent has all these lands untapped. Raise the alarm. So it's probably the smartest to just negate that, because I basically just need to survive here. And raise the alarm is also a convoke enabler and so on. So what I'm gonna do is plummet the spirit here and see if that resolves, because my opponent could have something to make them indestructible. And if it does, I'm just negating this. My best target for the negate is probably a Sanctified Charge, but it's just so much cheaper to cast the negate here, because I'll be free in deploying my stuff here. I don't care for extra cards right now. It is true that the meteorite would have potentially dealt with a flyer, but getting the train rolling here, so to speak, is just more valuable, I think. Hunt the Weak on Satyr Wayfinder is an option now, allowing me to just deal with Selfless Cathar But that doesn't seem right. I'm flooding out a bit here. I need to draw my powerful late game cards. But so far my opponent hasn't done anything scary. And I'm keeping the turn to frog, hunt the weak, gather courage combo to deal with anything that my opponent might have. I'm gonna play this forest because I want to maximize the amount of forests I have in play. And from now on, of course, now that I've drawn the assistant, it's going to be smart to just keep lands to discard. Alright. Fits perfectly into the curve, giving me a revoker, so I can actually hit the Soul Mender with it. I doubt that it's going to be super relevant to have that, but who knows? Oh wow. So okay, that used to work differently. Sorry guys, I'm gonna pause this. As it turns out, there are quite a lot of magic cards. Soul Mender has been called, and I'm still keeping this land in my hand. I mean, I could have gotten the Selfless Cathar as well. It doesn't look like it's going to be a scary activation. Whereas the Soul Mender is just a continuous source of life gain for my opponent. My deck isn't the best against Raise the Alarm, I have to say. But the good thing is that I don't need to be really aggressive with my cards. This is actually the point where Grind Clock again would actually be quite nice. But I think that I've probably won this game. Unless something really scary happens. I'm holding back the Revoker here. I don't think there's a good reason to attack with it. And I'm also going to hold back the Research Assistant. It does hold off both of my opponent's blockers. Yep. Tyrant's Machine. Opponent is very welcome to have that. With so many lands, it's actually not a super high cost to activate the machine, but it's also at a point where it's not threatening me, and it's not really the card that my opponent needed at this stage in the game. Stopped the early aggression, and the rest has been just really marginal cards only. And of course having a looter is still very, very good, even if it's so clunky. I might actually want to bounce my Meteorite here with the invasive species. I could bounce Shaman of Spring to get like one more card out of the deal, but that doesn't seem super relevant. I have all the options. I can even bounce my Revoker and prevent the Tyrant's Machine from holding off this game. So my Shaman is getting tapped. I'm just getting a point of damage in. And let's see, 3, 7, 8. So if I cast the species, I have 5 left. If I cast Elvish Mystic, I exactly have mana for the Research Assistant. And I can activate that with all the cards in my hand. Or let's see, I can actually just bounce the Meteorite and cast it immediately. And then cast the Mystic off it. I think that's even better. Or did I miscount? No, I think I just have to tap correctly. So if I tap this, play the species, this resolves. Oh, it's not even targeted, so that's nice. I guess I could have done all of this pre-combat maybe. And then the research assistant might have attacked as well. In theory, there is mass calcify, but the chances that my opponent has that are just pretty low. I'm usually not willing to play around a card before I have an idea that it could be in my opponent's deck. I didn't see one in the draft, and yeah, I just don't think that's what's happening. I see no reason to rush anything here. Like I said, apart from a card like Mass Calcify, I can pretty assuredly beat anything that my opponent does. I also have some nice plays available with the Void Snare, for example, bouncing the Meteorite. Okay, this looks good. Let's see. Convoke, Seraph of Dawn, Triplicate Spirit, Seraph of the Masses, that's what I meant. So this is going to be a 3/3. I have the Void Snare, and in particular I have the Turn to Frog. So $14 cards in my library, so I can afford to loot once again. Encrust is a way to deal with this, but I'm so clearly on the offensive that I don't think I need this card. Frostlings, so I can actually just tap the Seraph with 9 mana with the Mystic, so I can play the Tringrove and the Frostlings. That seems good. At this stage, I think I want to allow my opponent to trade off the Revoker, because any kind of creature that trades on my opponent's side is good for me because it shrinks the Seraph. Okay, my opponent has seen enough. See you for round 2, guys.
If you'd like to purchase Magic Online cards with event tickets while logged in on Magic Online, look at MTGO Academy's selection by trading our official bot, Academy Sellbot. You can find it in the Magic Online trading area or add it to your buddy list.
Hey everyone, time for round 2 and winning another die roll. Oh, this hand is not good. Chief Engineer and Statute of Denial. I guess this does something if this stays in play. My mana is not great, so I kind of like having a lot, and the Splash Mountain is there already. I can draw into Divination from here on, but objectively speaking, this hand is just a bit too weak. Alright, gonna try to win with Grand Clock only. Looks like my opponent is also going down to 6, so that's at least a fair matchup in that regard. So at some point we'll have to do the math on the Grind Clock, but clearly it's better to charge it right now. Also, my hand is developing quite nicely again. Yeah, thank you. That's really nice. Helping out my grind clock. I'll do some looting of my own. And discarding divination is unfortunate. I'm going to take the forest. I have my 2 islands for the double encrust. And the forest helps out the twin grove. So the way grind clock math works is that you have to find the right moment where you stop putting counters on. Okay, ulcerate my Seder Wayfinder. Deal 3 to me. I think that's fine. I mean, it's a reasonable play given that I'm grind clocking, but still. You need to find the right moment where the number of charge counters plus the 1 card your opponent draws each turn is lower than if you wait 1 more turn. Well, how do I say this? You have to solve the equation of how many turns you need to win with the grind clock counters plus the card drawn each turn. So in this case, it would be 5, but my opponent has 26 cards, so it would actually be 6 turns to mill him. And if I put another counter, then this factor changes to 6. My opponent goes down to 25 cards. So it's going to be 6 or 5 or 6 counters. So it's not yet there. I'm just running out the twin grove then. I don't care at this stage what kind of cards I show to my opponent, and this gives me 2 4/4s. If I hadn't drawn the land, I would have meteorite it. But this is even better. Pillar of Light and Typhoid Rat. So now the Treefog Warrior is actually almost stopped. Kurt Chieftain, yeah, that's where I need the meteorite for. So now I have 6 each turn with the grind clock. My opponent has 25 cards, so I need 4 activations, and then my opponent draws. Well, we'll have 1 card remaining. If I wait 1 more turn, then I have 7 each turn, and I'm looking at a 24 card library. So then I need 4 activations exactly. So waiting a turn, I need 4 activations, is a total of 5 turns to the win. And if I start grinding now, it's better, because if I activate it 5 times, I'm also winning. But if I activate it 4 times, I'm pretty close to winning. Funnily enough, I'm also beating down with my Treefog Warrior at the same time, because I see no reason not to get rid of that red and get in for damage here. You never know if the grind clock is going to work out. There's also the minor issue of grind clock potentially helping out your opponent. So if I'm afraid of reanimations or souls of Innistrad or something like that, then it would be safer to wait longer on the grind clock. But I'm not scared. Also, I get more information that way before my opponent maybe concedes on me. So what do we see here? Constricting Sliver. Yeah, nothing too interesting. I want to get all this info. A second ulcerate, okay, and a lot of death touch, but not a very aggressive deck, which is good for me. I'm not really in the mood or on the level in this format to bother with the amount of information I'm giving my opponent. I I don't think I have a big disadvantage by showing my opponent what I'm working with. And now I see that there is at least 2 constricting slivers in my opponent's deck, which is a bit scary. I'm not going to continue racing this. I don't see a reason to. This turn I didn't grind clock, so I might be denying myself the information if my opponent concedes here. It's just some very marginal things. But if I get priority again, I would do it. Yeah, okay. I didn't get any more information, but I think I have the information I need. Double ulcerate, double typhoid rats, 2 constricting slivers, maybe smaller slivers as well. So that's what I need to worry about. I don't think I have good ways to deal with the slivers, ultimately. The good Undergrowth Scavenger Grind Clock combo. Not that Grind Clock isn't good on its own. I could Void Snare. Doesn't seem amazing though. I have ways to block Intimidate creatures, so I don't think that I need Bronze Sable. Don't need cards like this, clearly. Yeah, I'm only worried about the Constricting Slivers. If I have a weak draw and these come down, take out everything I have basically, then I might be in trouble. Negate doesn't help against them, and all my other sideboard cards are worse than what I have in my main deck. I could play the other Moss Beast here, the other 6-drop I have, just so that I have a bit more punch to my overall game plan. I could definitely see cutting some of the weaker cards like Turn to Frog. I like the Statue of Denial though. That feels like it's going to be an important piece of the puzzle. I'm just gonna keep it like this, I think. Maybe Void Snare. I don't know how good Bouncing Constricting Sliver is actually going to be. Let's just try it like this and switch things around for game 3. This hand is horrible. And this hand is fine. It's not a great hand, but it's at least keepable. Typhoid Rats. So I really want to get the mountain with the Evolving Wilds. Even if it means that the Twin Grove is not growing. I can't really get the forest just because I have the Twin Grove in hand. It's more important to have the Chieftain live if I draw that. So the Typhoid Reds beatdown is actually a draw that I'm not really great against, because you don't just want to trade the Chasm Skulker for it, clearly. Also the Encrusts are horrible against Typhoid Reds and so on. So what I probably need to do is to get hit by the rats a bit. Okay, I don't even have the luxury of deciding. So that's unfortunate. I would have loved to keep the Skulker around, of course. There's another forest. So I can invasive species, or I could encrust a red. It seems like a wasted encrust, but I don't want to block Typhoid Rats with invasive species. I also don't want to slow down my draw by bouncing a land at this stage of the game. I could have encrusted the Necromancer's Assistant, but then my opponent always has the option to just hold it back the whole time and generates card advantage that way, which I didn't want to allow. So this is interesting. Phyrexian Revoker is actually a pretty good blocker for the Assistant, meaning that I might not need to play the invasive species. My plan until I drew the Revoker was to just encrust the Assistant, which might actually be better given that Ulcerate is a thing. And if I draw another land, I think I'm winning anyway. Then I will play the Tringrove and bounce it again and play it again, and that should hopefully do it. So I'm just encrusting aggressively here, and I'm playing the Revoker. My first instinct would just be to deny something powerful like Liliana. Let's see if I can find that. I found it, and it's funny, my opponent actually said Liliana in the chat, which is an interesting aspect here. I was gonna pick it anyway, but the fact that my opponent says it, of course, could mean that he doesn't have it, could mean that he has it. I didn't see any activated abilities when I milled my opponent. It's possible that I missed one, but I'm just going to say Liliana Vess. And yeah, ultimately, I don't think it's going to matter too much. So the worst case scenario is that my opponent thinks that he talked me into it. I could actually just block here. Typhoid Rats is going to trade with a creature of mine no matter what. I'm on 11, and Phyrexian Revoker is only good if my opponent has a Cursed Spirit. But then I still have the option to bounce and crust. So yeah, I think the block is fine. Land? Forest even. I'm not playing against Ulcerate here by just running this out, but I'm just not very likely to top deck a Forest. Now my Treefolk have survived, so that's great. I can offer the trade with the Treefolk Warrior, and I will be playing another 3/3, so I don't think I want to offer the trade with this Tringrove though, because then I'm not using the invasive species for full effect. It's possible that my opponent wouldn't have blocked. Might have been a way to get some more of an advantage. Yeah, I'm just going for the value play here. I'm hoping that I'm not getting raised by Shadowcloak Vampire, which otherwise I would have had to encrust. Sungrace Pegasus doesn't affect the clock, I think. No. I'm just looking at a 3-turn clock here. Stab wound. Okay, that changes the clock. So I'm on 5 and I drew a Meteorite. My opponent is on 12 and is just gonna kill me. I can use the Meteorite to get rid of the stab wound, but then I'm dead in the air. And if I get rid of the Sungrace Pegasus, then I'm also dying to the stab wound trigger. So yeah, I'm not beating the stab wound. Maybe if I would have bounced and encrust to encrust the Shadow Cloak, I still think that the stab wound ultimately wins. But it would have probably been better and closer. So Flyers beating me Still have the Void Snare just to get some something going. I also have the Plummet, which might actually be the card that I want here. I would also like some ways to get an advantage over these Typhoid Rats. Playing like random 2/1s isn't really the best idea to do that. Plummet is great, no question about that. And it is just kind of difficult to get an advantage over Death Touch creatures. So I suppose my plan has to be not to die to the aggression, not to die to a draw like the one that my opponent had. I'm wondering whether Void Snare is maybe better than, for example, Turn to Frog. No, Turn to Frog is a really nice answer to what my opponent does, or is trying to do. I'm going to take out this statue, I think. And I don't think I need the Void Snare. And I have the Grind Clock, so I'm keeping. My opponent is also on white-black, so Grind Clock is just really tough to beat for my opponent. The rest of my hand isn't amazing, but I even have the Satyr Wayfinder to generate value against Typhoid Rats, which my opponent doesn't seem to have. Yeah, Grind Clock against white-black is pretty amazing. There's a forest. Some cards go to the graveyard, and I can actually fetch the mountain here, saving some time. Opponent is ulcerating the Wayfinder. Again, quite aggressive, but a nice play given that my next play would have been the Primadox. Warden of the Beyond is also nice with Constricting Sliver. This is how it works, right? Owns a card in exile, yes. I see no reason not to play the Primadox here. It should always just prevent damage, and the drawback doesn't matter too much. Another creature would definitely be better, clearly. Chief Engineer. So Chief Engineer gets to stick around, blocks the Warden just as well, and then I can theoretically hunt the weak the turn after. Although, to be fair, I can always hunt the weak with Chief Engineer next turn. Yeah, the Primadox isn't doing anything, so I'm gonna play another creature here. Okay, I'm going to 18, so far things are working out nicely. Let's see if there's a Shadow Cloak Vampire or something like that. A Stab Wound, okay. Well, then the Roaring Primadox is pretty nice. Okay, this is also nice because if my opponent wants to attack with his creatures, then the Stab Wound is dealt with as well. It's more likely that I just get to return the Chief Engineer next turn. And with 28, I would need 6 turns to Grind Clock my opponent out. And if I wait one more turn, it's going to be for 6. And my opponent draws another card, so then I need also 6 turns. But I think it's probably, yeah, there's no advantage to starting now. I should be faster if I wait one more turn, I think. Let's see what happens if I activate it for 2 more times. My opponent goes down to 26 cards, and then I'm milling. I think I'm always milling in 6 turns somehow. There's currently no way to be faster than that, which could be a problem, but we'll see what happens. I'll leave my options open with the grind clock for now. So is this a constricting sliver? I don't think so. Otherwise my opponent would have just slammed it. And if my opponent doesn't have anything good in hand, I think I have to wait with the grind clock. Simply because there might be some raised dead effects in my opponent's hand. So I kind of need to play around that a little bit. So, okay, I'm taking 2. I'm returning the engineer. Drawing a divination, alright. 4, 5, 6. I kind of want to hunt the weak, the Razorfoot Griffin with the Chief Engineer. Then I will only play the divination next turn. But that's not a big issue. So clearly the Chief Engineer is a card that could be dealt with by my opponent. Let's hope that works out. My opponent has all the mana in the world, so this is a bit risky here. On the other hand, taking extra damage is not what I want to be doing. And once my opponent draws a constricting sliver, for example, then I might be in trouble. Oh, this is something I'm happy to see. That's usually not the case with Child of Night, but in this case, I think I can be happy about it. So here it's now potentially better to return Roaring Primadox so that I keep it too far around. With the drawback being that I spend a bit more mana, so I might not have the most mana efficient turn here. Gather Courage is nice. Invasive Species. Let's see, there's no synergy with Grind Clock, at least not a synergy that I'm seeing. So it's still better to get the Primadox down. Yeah, that seems correct. I mean, the Invasive Species is easier on the mana, but the Primadox is just the stronger creature. Let's see. If my opponent actually draws the Constricting Sliver, I might want him to only get rid of a weaker creature so that I have the 4/4 to block the Warden and to block the Constricting Sliver as well. But I have the Gather Courage, so I don't think I'm not losing because my creatures are not large enough as blockers. I have a 4-turn clock with the Grind Clocks now. And going up to 8 isn't going to change that. I could go up to 9 a turn, so wait 2 more turns. But then I only have a 3-turn clock. So I'm going to start milling my opponent now with a Grind Clock. This should be a point in time where the advantage of my opponent filling his graveyard isn't too large. Okay. It's on. Or not. It's on. So the card that I need to... Okay, something is happening. A Pillar of Light. So yeah, this would have had a target anyway. And it's getting exiled, so that's kind of nice for my opponent, I guess. And interestingly, the Rescue Swiftclaw is just offering up to run into this Chief Engineer. And that seems like the better creature to block compared to blocking the Warden. Because then I need to play my trick first and might run into something. This way I'm potentially taking 6, but I hope that my opponent doesn't have a play and then things should work out. Let's see if we can find these slivers. There's one. sadly no help from the top of the deck. So now this defense has to hold, basically. If my opponent boarded in all kinds of raised dead effects, then I'm probably losing. I don't really know how the blocking. Okay, Chief Engineer is first. I think I'm fine with the damage resolving here. I have the Gather Courage, but no reason to play it. The fact that my opponent passed meant that it was unlikely that there was something happening, but I can still have the Gather Courage in hand. Clearly it would be best if I managed to draw a creature. Okay, so there it is. Razorfoot Griffin is coming back. And the Constricting Sliver. And the Razorfoot Griffin is going to be cast. And then I'm taking 4 damage next turn. But I'm also milling my opponent to death. I think I'm winning the race here. Thanks to Grind Clock. It's also a nice draw. I'm not going to try to raise my opponent or anything. I'm winning in 2 turns with the Grind Clock. So if things go well here, I'm only taking 2 from the Griffin. Okay, this was a bit sloppy. I guess I should have pumped my invasive species first. And then I'm winning, yeah. I would have milled 2 more times with the Grind Clock. And very closely won the game. Well, if this is an Elvish Mystic, then I'm probably... I can probably win, even if the Grind Clock takes one turn longer. But a turn to Grind Clock is just very tough to beat, so we're in the finals.